So welcome everyone to another virtual CLHO colleague circle. I'm Amris Williams, CLHO's Executive Director, and I want to welcome you here today for this conversation about digital and remote internships. For those of you who are just joining us or using Zoom for the first time, if you are not familiar with Zoom, to reveal the Zoom controls, you can just move your mouse around and that should reveal a few icons at the bottom. You can here access the chat and as well as other features. We'll be fielding your questions in the chat, and my colleague Joni DiMartino, who's the museum curator and site superintendent at the Prudence Crandall Museum, is here with me. She's a CLHO board member and she'll be helping me monitor the chat for your questions. If you have a longer question that you'd like to speak or interact with the panel and want to unmute yourself in your video, please just let us know in the chat and we'll help you out with that, call on you. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat and we'll see what we can do to address them. And it's a good place also to share any resources that you might have or things that are going on from your own perspective that you'd like to share with other folks who are on this call. I want to welcome today also Professor Leah Glaser, who's Professor of History at Central Connecticut State University, who's going to be launching our discussion today. She is also the coordinator of the Public History program at Central, which is the place where, under normal circumstances, CLHO has its office. But of course, we are not there right now. And Leah is also active with the National Council on Public History, as well as maintaining an active research program of her own. She was on sabbatical this spring, working on a book project, but I'm sure that, like many of us, that didn't go exactly as planned. So if you're ready, Leah, I'd like to turn things over to you to kick off our conversation about this important topic about how to do internships at this moment in time.
Sure, and thanks for inviting me to do this, Amris. I actually sort of ended the last month of sabbatical trying to keep up with what was going on with all the COVID stuff, including joining a lot of webinars about collecting for COVID, but also digital internships and seeing what other people were doing, because I knew that a lot of my students were going to try to get internships this summer and certainly through the year, not knowing how long this is going to last. So I wanted to make sure that I was up on best practices. So I'm just gonna, I sort of broke my talk into sections, and please, anybody who has questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, and I'll certainly interrupt myself to address anything. I'd like to know in the chat if you feel like contributing about, how serious you are about getting interns this year concerning the pandemic. I'm curious to know, even though just Wednesday, museums were allowed to open, how many of you actually are and to what extent. But I pulled some examples, and I just wanted to start by saying that I am active in the National Council on Public History, and I tend to follow their best practices. I teach historic preservation through the program. My colleague Dan Broyle deals with museums. I've sat on both webinars for museum people and public history people. This is the League of History Organizations, so that's good because I focus more on history museums and the possibilities for that than museums in general. But during these 3 or 4 that I've set in on, I just compiled all these, sort of tried to compile some best practices. So I did provide Amris with a link that I think she'll provide about what the public history field believes is best practices for public history internships. They were working on that for several years. And we came up with something a few years ago that is always good before or after this pandemic is over. The NCPH takes the position that internships are an important part of public history education that allows students to gain insight into the nature of public history practice by engaging in meaningful work under the mentorship of experienced and knowledgeable public history professionals. That's you guys. Successful internships provide students with work experience combined with structured opportunities to reflect on their activities and connect their practical experience with skills and knowledge gained in public history training. So we do think of these internships as sort of partnerships in the students' education. Internships are a little bit more than volunteers, not quite full employees. During this time, the field is actively encouraging digital internships because digital skills involving collections management, online programming, and online interpretation are part of the future of the field anyway. So in many ways, this is kind of an opportunity for everybody, especially as physical interactivity is following the wayside. For so long, everybody was all about interaction and touch screens and being physically involved and being on site, and obviously that's fallen out of favor for right now. Learning software and engaging in social media platforms is a really important skill for the future of the profession. Most of my students have gotten a lot of students have gotten work in this field and the profession as they've emerged from the program. Like higher ed, none of this is meant to replace on-ground experiences, which will always be more immersive and engaging. We certainly are all about place and public history, but most of us came to this profession because we believe that physical historic spaces are critical to our personal, social, political, and hopefully economic well-being. And we also want to stress that this is not, that you should not consider this a virtual internship, because it really is a real internship that will develop valuable skills. So the profession is urging that we use the word remote instead of virtual. All expectations when thinking about an internship should be very clearly articulated beforehand. What the intern wants to get out of the experience, the intern we'll try to make sure that our interns are clear about that. But the intern has to serve both their needs as well as the institution. There has to be a two-way street in terms of the value of that experience. So how might you as institutions take advantage of all this now? Necessity is the mother of invention. If the goal is historical education, how do we do that in the absence of the resource that is supposed to do the teaching when places are closed or we don't have access to the indoors of these spaces? The field was already moving past depending on just objects and resources to tell a whole story. We know that, of course, what is happening now with race and Black Lives Matter, we're seeing that museums have a greater responsibility rather than just one tied to their particular collection. We know the issues this country is facing are complex, and this really gives museums a real purpose as a field to step away from just their role and connection to the physical collections and more to sort of as a community resource. And these are places that internships can really help as ways to think about how your museum can become more engaged in the community and help participate in these public discussions. These particularly unique circumstances are forcing us to rethink how we've been doing things. The touch screens have been a problem for a while in terms of technology. So students can help with looking at best practices for the field, and as mentioned earlier, this can include reopening plans, doing interviews, participating in webinars. Students can help test software and digital platforms in which to engage visitors, patrons, and even new audiences altogether. So even if you don't have a hard project for a student, one idea is certainly that students can help you investigate what others are doing during this time. So what should these internships look like? I'm going to pause here before I kind of get into that and see if anybody has any questions about what I just said. Okay. So things to think about if you're trying to figure out what kinds of projects or activities an intern should do. Internships should always engage students on a professional level that employs their training as historians in the public arena, strengthens their skills, maybe develops skills they don't have, encourages collaboration and teamwork, and enriches their understanding of how public history methods are applied in practice. Such work should be performed under the supervision of experienced public history professionals willing to share their knowledge and insights with student interns. So even though it might be tempting to kind of hand off a project to a student, it's really important that even though these are remote internships, that there continues to be a lot of communication between the professional and the student. Additionally, students should have the opportunity to produce a significant work project exemplifying their internship experience. However, I do want to emphasize that experience in an internship is far more important than having a set project. In our program, the Capstone Project is something different. Capstone projects have a community partner, and often the Capstone projects grow from the internship, but really think about the internship as more of an experience. At CCSU, we require those kinds of as separate things. The internship is 3 credits and the capstone is 3 credits. The internship is supposed to be about experience and gaining skills that we are not able to develop in our academic classroom environment. They do not need, again, a singular or finite project, but perhaps rather multiple small projects or tasks, or becoming part of an ongoing project that the institution is already working on, and also often participating in regular duties. Internships should involve real work and skills building. Clearly, the field is now advising, due to safety concerns and social distancing, that the best internship during this pandemic practice are designed as remote. I know that some people have been thinking of sort of sending students to warehouses to process collections, and they'd be alone, so it would be safe. It's isolating a student intern and assuming that, by definition, does not give them a lot of clear direction. Remember that this is sort of a mentorship relationship. So I would start to think of this as developing internships that are kind of designed to be remote, and not just what you would do as an internship anyway, and then you try to make that remote. We kind of do that with classes. It's better to design a class as an online class instead of trying to transfer a class to a digital platform. So these are real internships and not substitutions. We want to emphasize that. The goals should encompass what an intern can do for your institution while not physically being on site. And there are options. As I said, mentorship is a difference. You won't be able to be with that student physically, but you will be able to meet with them. You won't be able to stand by a water cooler, and the student might not be able to chat in the elevator or in the office kitchen. But if you do staff meetings via Zoom, try to integrate the intern into that conversation, engage them in that way. If you have, it's really good to have, if you're able, even more than one intern. If you do have more than one intern, it's really helps to build an intern cohort. That helps motivate them, and then they can kind of work together back and forth. Another difference during this time is keeping in mind, however, that students have a lot of pressure on them. This was a big issue during this spring, that students had to work full and part-time jobs, that they had family obligations, that they wouldn't necessarily have the same kind of time flexibility. A lot of our students are not your typical, live at home 20-year-old or even 24-year-old. They have other obligations. So as much flexibility in hours is kind of important also. Giving students access to some museum software because they won't necessarily have all that. Other ideas for internships, helping them use, I kind of mentioned this already, but use an intern to test operations. They can kind of be a crowdsourcing person for you if you've already put stuff on the web and you're not sure how the usability, the interface and usability is. Have the intern kind of do that and review that, participate in that, and provide feedback for your website, online exhibit, whatever digital program. Have them go on virtual field trips and conduct reconnaissance interviews to similar institutions and see what they're doing or what they have done regarding reopening procedures or whatever you need now. That helps the student understand best practices right now and what other people are doing, and it will probably also help you think about where you're going. Now is a great opportunity to work on digitization and cataloging. Students can easily work on digitization projects where interns can organize and create metadata describing collections and objects and contexts. You can take pictures and send those objects to them virtually. They can do research. Our students are good at, and certainly need to be good at compiling reading lists and bibliographies to help contextualize themes. That's something students can easily do. I know a lot of institutions are thinking about how to convert educational programming to virtual resources since they can't do those field trips as much anymore. And so some of our students have training as in education because several of them initially intended to be teachers and then decided they wanted to go into public history. Designing mobile walking tours, designing and tweaking virtual tours in museums. Engage them in research that can be conducted primarily online or by the phone. I want to emphasize that our students have access to tons of databases that your institution might not. They have access to Ancestry, they have interlibrary loan privileges. They can get a lot more out there and a lot more, their hands on a lot more research, primary sources and secondary sources that you might not be able to, so you can really take advantage of the students there. Some other webinars that I've been on are all about digital storytelling, especially during this COVID time. And you can have students test out short form or other kinds of software like Pixstory, that's Pixstory, that involves kind of taking a picture of an object and then having a short interview, and it all goes into one kind of one file. A student can help work on compiling those. In the preservation field, students can write architectural descriptions and national and state register nominations. They can certainly get out there and do site visits individually during this time. They can transcribe oral histories, provide metadata and historical context to those. They can survey and review grants if that's something your institution does. They can even help do the preliminary work to develop research for a grant, which includes historical context and data gathering. They can design visitor engagement surveys for when you're back on ground. And they can even conduct some of those engagement surveys online in terms of how members are reacting to what you're doing during this time. And finally, something that somebody said was really a good project for interns was obtaining permissions for upcoming exhibits and publications. It's a lot of kind of more tedious work, but it's a good experience for students to get out and do that kind of thing. So those are just some ideas. I have a packet that I give students in terms of what their expectations are as students that I can provide Amherst with to blast out to you guys after this is done. But things that you want to think about as once you do have an intern is make sure you continue to sort of have an orientation for them, that you onboard them, that you have a list of readings about your institution itself and the content of your institutions, because the student is going to do a much better job for you if they understand the resource in the institution. So the faculty will help provide a reading list as well, but a reading list that might include, as I said, the content relevant to your institution, and even the neighborhood and the town, and the context and your audience and all of those things are really helpful for the student to understand. Treat your student as an employee and not a volunteer, so that they should again be part of staff meetings. They should be part of conversations and planning, and keep them in the loop on day-to-day text chains and everything, that kind of thing, more so than you would a typical volunteer. Treat them, as I said, as staff as much as you can. Take advantage of the skilled work that they might have, whether they have particular talents in photography or what have you. And I know that budgets are really tight right now. Best practices are to provide some kind of compensation for internships generally, but any size stipend is appreciated just to place value on their work. And if you absolutely can't provide a stipend, as I mentioned earlier, access to museum software or memberships is really helpful. As far as CCSU providing students, it is required in our program. Like everybody else in higher ed, we are struggling with maintaining students during this time. And so we certainly want to work with as many institutions as possible, but the problem is always getting the right fit and the right timing. So whether we have an intern ready for you will often depend on their interest and their availability, and often even their personality, although I've been quite successful in matching students with institutions. And I think we've only had one problem where personalities just clashed and we had to pull an intern from that situation, and that's over the last 13 years. I'm going to pause again to see if anybody has any questions. And I also have a couple of examples of people who have institutions, especially the federal government, has set up a lot of really cool virtual internships that they've been doing this for a while now. And you can poke around and sort of see what some examples are in terms of how they're described.
Leah, we don't have any questions, but we do have a couple people that would be interested in sharing their experiences with their internship currently. So I don't know if that's something you want to go on to now, or if we should just hold off on that for a discussion.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be great. Because that would certainly goes with what's works and what doesn't. Yep.
Okay. We have Elisa, who had mentioned that she had switched to a remote internship in mid-March from her Simmons Archives and History graduate student. And she was very surprised at how well it worked out. So Amherst, if you want to unmute Elisa so she could share her experiences with us, that would be great.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Leah Glaser, and I'm the Special Collections Librarian at the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. We had an intern that was supposed to start in March, and she was here at the academy for about a week, and then everybody was kind of sent home to work remotely, and the cadets didn't come back from spring break, and etc. So basically what we did in preparation, because we had a feeling that that was coming, is that she was working on a bunch of photograph albums that were donated by a family from a man who had graduated from the academy during World War II. So we took photos of all those photo albums, and then we basically decided to, set up weekly meetings and email and things like that, so that she could work on creating a finding aid from home, and also just doing an inventory of all the photos in the photo album. And she did both really well. And, we talked a lot back and forth, and, I explained to her how, finding aids worked, and how, we had preferences and how we wanted ours to be, and, gave her a little bit of guidance on, the history of the Coast Guard during World War II, and some resources that she could use when creating the historical background and the scope and content note. And, she did such a good job with it that I ended up writing an article for the alumni bulletin and included, her historical background in it. And so we kind of both wrote the article together. And I shared it with the family who had donated the photo albums, and they wrote back that, they're like, this is such a wonderful article. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for preserving our father's memory, and we consider you part of the family now. So it was a success, and I would definitely do it again. And even after, when all this ends, I would consider doing it for non-traditional students, or people that can't necessarily come to the library in person as much you know, as the internship requires.
Yeah, as I mentioned, you know, Connecticut is small, but students do work even outside of COVID, and sometimes getting the hours in is pretty difficult. So having the flexibility where they certainly should get to the site, you know, as much as they can, but having some design that they can do some of their work remotely is something to think about, you know, not just in the short term. Anybody else have experiences to share?
We had a Mike from CTDA mention that he's having a good experience with their summer intern this summer, and I'm not sure if he wants to share his information. That's the only comments that we have at this time. Oh, he says sure. So Amherst, if you can unmute him, please.
So all these pop-ups just started popping up on my screen. Hi, yes, I'm Mike Kamisis from the Connecticut Digital Archive. Yeah, we have a summer undergraduate intern. She lives in Connecticut, but she goes to Mount Holyoke College. And we are lucky in that everything we do is web-based, in the sense that when you're talking about kind of museum software, all of our software is available to anyone who has an account just through the website, through the Connecticut Digital Archive. So makes it a little easier on that. And what I've found very helpful is she works 3 days a week. I set aside at least 15 minutes in the afternoon to check in. And what's really been good is those 15-minute meetings have turned into 45-minute, hour-long meetings, just talking about projects, things that are going on, questions that she has. I'll tell her, say, hey, go look at this, and working on a project, working with the collection, and she has some really pointed questions. We're working on looking at gaps and silences in the collection, and she's coming back with really tough questions about the historical record in Connecticut in the CTDA and how we're having gaps. So she's working on a project like that. So that's been really good. A lot of the projects that we're having her do have come out of those conversations, which is a little different than if we have them in person, where it's more, I stop by their desk. It's a little less structured, kind of the way I work. I like having the time to debrief and to answer questions and kind of just talk about the profession and talk about what we do and what, how we operate, and just learn more about what she wants to do. So it's not groundbreaking stuff, but it's nice, and it's working really well. And we're really lucky. She's really smart and really, she really dives into things and has pointed questions and pointed kind of comments. So it's worked really well so far. And we were going to have only these check-ins every, for the first 2 weeks. But I think we're going to extend them for the rest of the internship, just to touch base every day. And I think that kind of having that structure works really well.
Yeah, I think that's really critical, definitely being available for that mentorship, because that's the real key for the internship. That's what they're doing this for, is to have that communication with the professional who's going to help guide them and address questions, because they're going to be really, really insecure about a lot of what they're doing, especially not being on site. And so I think that's a great idea to have regular check-ins. Let's see. I know Adrian just asked the typical number of hours we have an intern do. For graduate students, it's about 120 hours. Usually graduate students do internships over the summer, often into the fall. Some do it in the spring, depending on when they started the program. Our undergrads primarily do their internships in the spring because we have an undergrad class. Part of the reason for this is because the CSU system is unionized, and faculty are not allowed to supervise interns over the summer, because then they have to pay us extra. So they try to encourage that we kind of consolidate our undergraduate interns. That's not to say that somebody couldn't be interning at another time, but primarily we place our interns, undergrad, which are always juniors or seniors, in the spring. They serve about 100 hours, which is about an 8-hour day a week, I guess, over the course of the semester. And then the student is allowed to do more hours if they want, and they often do, because they want to finish up. It just really depends on their project and their availability. Let's see, Amherst, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask, another question we had was, can you share how organizations who might be interested in having an intern connect with you to start the process of getting a CCSU public history intern process, timeline, things like that?
Yeah, I think I sent this to Amherst already, so hopefully that is, again, something that we discussed getting out to all of you. There's usually sort of an inquiry form, like a sponsor form that I have everybody fill out. And obviously it starts with an email to me. Also, if you don't get this, just email me directly at CCSU. Do you want to put my contact info? And I'll send you the form, and it's basically asking, you know, what kind of intern do you want? Do you want an undergrad or a grad or either one? What kind of project is it? And then the ideal situation is that I start to compile these. Ideally, they're projects that are still going to be relevant over the next couple of years, because again, we don't always have the right student for the right project. But I like to collect them all. It's always works best when a student comes to me and they're interested in an internship or they have to do it, and I'm able to show them, here are all the opportunities we have, and they read through them and they're like, wow, I'm really interested in that one. And then what happens is I contact you, the community sponsor, and you set up an interview between the student and you. And then what happens at that interview is you guys get to know each other. We want to make sure that the personalities mesh and that everybody is getting something out of this. And then I have the community sponsor and the student get back to me separately and say, yes, I want to do this. So that if you kind of were turned off by the student, or the student, it was not what the student thought it was going to be, they could kind of tell me privately, and you guys never have to interact again. And I just find another opportunity. But that hardly ever happens. Usually I just have both parties say yes. And then as part of this packet that they have, either the student or myself or whatever faculty member is sponsoring the internship will send you an agreement that we have as part of this packet, which we'll also try to send you. Just remember, the packet that we're going to send you is meant for it's geared towards students because it's part of their packet. But it has all the forms that the community partner would need and what their obligations are. And their obligations include things that I've already talked about: mentorship, making sure there can be part of staff meetings. There's a midterm and a final evaluation form. Your evaluation of the student folds into their grade, but ultimately it's the faculty who gives the final grade. If there's any problem or any issue with the student, you contact the faculty, myself or the faculty sponsor, so as early as possible, so it's not like an ongoing problem throughout the semester. In terms of, it's hard to, how organizations might be interested, how many we might have this year. We're still so early because the universities are still trying to figure out how much we're going back online. And so students are really, really waiting to hear. Students are waiting to hear what it's going to be like before they sign up for classes. So some students, I think, are thinking of taking the semester off. But every time a student says, I want to do an internship, it's always great to have a place. Well, this person needs one.
There are no current questions in the chat, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to post there.
I'd also, if we'd like to get a larger conversation going about what people are thinking about in terms of, internships for the summer, if you want to speak or share some of the things that your organization is thinking about, please feel free to unmute yourself and share your video. you know, the colleague circles are really meant as conversations. And if we have ideas where we can help each other out on what we're thinking about or problems that you're facing, this is a great opportunity with Dr. Glaser here with us to just kind of think through those together.
I put a link to the virtual federal services ones, and I went through yesterday and pulled all the history ones. There's some really fun ones on that site, including a lot of the activities that I've kind of already described. I'll post a couple specific ones there. A lot of them do have to do with, though, interviewing veterans, storytelling, putting together online interpretations. There's one about the Lewis and Clark Trail. What's cool, the opportunity for students in all of this is that where we used to try to place them so it was convenient for them to physically get to the site, that doesn't matter as much anymore. So you can even reach out, you know, you're not dependent on the student's physical availability or transportation with these either. You're not limited by that.
Dr. Glaser, we have somebody asking, would adding materials to a digital repository be a good project?
If it was more than, I think, just data entry, and I'm not saying that the student should never do kind of data entry or database work. You know, we always try to emphasize that everybody does pretty boring work sometimes as part of their regular job description, and the intern will have to also, but we want to guard against them doing just really tedious work all the time. So if it's maybe limit that kind of data entry, but if it involves describing the objects and, as said, adding all kinds of metadata in terms of you know, where the object, you know, comes from and provenance and those kinds of informations, developing finding aids like Elisa was talking about, that, you know, that's certainly fair game, particularly for a student interested in registration and collections work.
And we just have
oh, hey, Jenny. I was just going to say the Jewish Historical Society, we were able to connect with somebody whose plans for the summer have been canceled. She's actually been out of school for a few years and works at a nearby college, but not in the summer. And she was interested in working on some digital exhibitions and stuff like that. So we just started that with her and just figuring out the best way to set up this kind of structure like Mike was talking about. But it seems like that kind of thing could work really well over the summer.
Yeah, I think there's sort of, you can think of it, you know, it's, as I said, it's 120 hours. You can think of it sort of as some sections. There should be about there should be time for the student to get acclimated to the institution, and then there should be sort of some time spent figuring out exactly what's expected of them and setting these schedules for check-in and mentorship. And then increasingly, you know, maybe you can back off in terms of the hands-on part, but it's really important to get all that set up more so on the front end.
Leah, can you speak to the idea of organizations posing an intern to craft their own internship? That's a question that's come up here, that the person has seen organizations asking for proposed ideas based off their collection or the museum's mission by the interns themselves.
I think with guidance, I think students often believe that they can do more than they can or should be doing, and that sometimes, you know, a student might go in and they're like, oh, I can just do this exhibit, like the, you know, and they won't necessarily, because the whole point of the internship is for them to understand what is involved in this kind of institution. They might not understand what all the steps are, and 120 hours might not be necessarily enough for them to see it from start to finish. So I think there needs to be some guidance in terms of that. I know, Joni, you're taking one of our students, and one of my suggestions was that part of her time be spent looking at what these things look like, you know, and making sure that they have models, and that she consults with you about what is going to work for the needs of your particular institution. So it would just need, you can tap that student's creativity and interests for sure, but it would need to be a collaborative process.
Right.
Hi, it's me, Christina. I posed that question. And you're right, I do take on way too much sometimes, but I also got that idea because of the Poster Museum in New York City. It was a very competitive internship. And I got through to the interview stage, but it was because I tried to pose a very like creative idea, right? And there was a lot of creative ideas. So I think in one way too, it creates this sense of healthy competition, right? If you allow an intern to come to that interview and say, well, I've seen your collection, I'm very inspired by what you do, here is why I think I could take it to the next level. Because when we're crafting internships, you know, we should try to think about what's missing and what can this person bring to us and their skill set, right? And sometimes you may not even realize that like a virtual 3D tour was the thing your institution needed, or how like affordable it actually could be with like the use of a millennial, like, you know, so it might be worth affording that opportunity to, even if you had a specific idea, afford the intern the opportunity to think creatively, just like Dr. Glaser was saying, because they're really going to bring something that you might not have seen before, hopefully, you know, and it's worth doing that because that's how we move forward. So
I think that's something that could easily be done during that interview that I talked about,
yes.
that you have the chance to really look at the resume and see that you have an idea for a project, but maybe this particular student, as I said, has these talents or interests that didn't seem immediately related before, like art or photography or design or some kind of background, or take whatever experience they do have, which can be limited. Sometimes they're incredibly experienced, and really take advantage of that either way.
Yes, Queen. Thank you for hearing me.
Mm-hmm.
And Valerie Chase mentions that virtual tours are an interesting idea because you can bring visitors to areas not usually accessible.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that somebody could go out and do. You know, they wouldn't have to necessarily do in front of the computer the whole time. You know, they'd be able to map it out outside, and even maybe meet up with you at a distance, you know, at certain points. Again, you know, these kinds of things, while seemingly remote might mean isolated, try to make these as not isolating as possible. Just keep in mind that you're there to help mentor this person, and the check-ins are important because you don't want them coming back with the results of a project that really weren't what you had in mind. And so we want both parties to get something out of it.
Andy was also, I'm sorry to jump in here, Joni, but Andy's mentioned a couple of projects that that they're working on at Stanley Whitman House. I don't know if Andy, you want to talk at all about what you're thinking to have those interns do around these digital projects?
Sure, I'm just, hold on one second here. Hi, everybody, I'm sorry. I have a bad glare behind me of this overhead light. Hi, Leah, nice to see you. We do 2 digital projects here at Stanley Whitman House, our Captive People project and our Digital Farmington project. And we've actually had CCS students working with us in the past before. And a lot of the success of our Digital Farmington project was because of Dr. Catherine Hermes, who's a professor in the history department. So we are at this point in time looking at trying to do workshops around them so that we can engage people to show them how they can list their materials and put their blog posts up on the Digital Farmington website. It's a blog and a map, and you have the links. I encourage you all to go there. And then with the Captive Peoples project, we're looking to actually develop that and make that a better website. So doing research and looking at how other people are doing things. And particularly because of this moment now with Black Lives Matter, there might be a different way of presenting the website. So we'd like to maybe work with the student or community volunteer around helping us to develop that. As you know, we're a small museum, and our volunteerism is a big part of what helps us to advance the mission here. So does anyone have any questions or anything that you had in mind that I should direct this to, Amherst?
No, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what you were working on, see if it generated some more conversation. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, today we're trying to figure out just how we're going to reopen, so if at all. So, so we you know, with the list of priorities that are going on, I'm sure everybody else is going to do the same thing, as well as getting ready for Connecticut Historic Gardens Day. So, pretty exciting.
I think the idea of, you know, capitalizing on these two moments of COVID and Black Lives Matter and discussions of racism, you can spend this time that even if you're not opening physically, you can spend a lot of valuable time looking at what similar institutions as yours are doing to engage the public in conversations that relate to the themes of your institution, for sure. Yeah, and again, gathering those best practices is a great project for an intern or a volunteer. Gathering reading lists, they're all over the place now. It's overwhelming, so overwhelming.
Yeah. We're actually, just this morning, I put a list together for the Wesleyan bookstore. It's an independent bookstore that they team up with there, and we just send our book list down to see if they can gather available titles for us. So we're kind of doing this with a very small team here, but I think maybe leveraging the help of interns with this would be really great for us.
I wonder if that's something CLHO can also help with in partnership with CCSU, Amherst, is to really start to gather reading lists and resources and post them for everybody, so each institution wouldn't be having to sort of make these collective reading lists on their own, particularly as they relate to Connecticut, you know, and the nation at large, obviously, also. But
absolutely, we have a resource library on our website that's a little, honestly, a little hard to navigate. It's sort of like one of my to-do list projects to make that a bit more user-friendly and kind of go through what we've got there, and because there is actually a lot there, but a reading lists are a really good idea. Please feel free to send things to me or to Carlin at info@clho.org if you have stuff that you want to share and want us to get up. We're always looking for useful stuff that our members find. You know, if you find it useful, chances are somebody else is going to find it useful. If you're generating some material that you think could be useful to other folks, we're happy to serve that role as a clearinghouse and get the word out.
So Tasha Caswell said that CHS decided not to do its summer internship this year, and they're considering what their options are for the fall. But they're very interested in having interns work on transcription projects.
I think that's a great project. It's just, again, depending on how tedious it is, you might need to supplement it with a little more. But I know, talking to other people at CHS, there might be some things as the year goes on, and hopefully things either, well, we'll see how it all unfolds over the next year. But using interns in the fall to even help figure out contingency plans for the museum, or different ways of still engaging the public around really pressing issues. So, and then because that's all really heavy stuff, they can retreat sometimes and do a certain number of hours just doing some nice relaxing transcription work. Or you pull those interviews, that are really, really relevant to right now. And that would really engage people and be something, rather than maybe just, oh, we haven't done these in a while, to be really deliberate about which ones the students are transcribing. And again, that you help them contextualize what they're transcribing also with with readings, because the more they know, the more they're able to understand.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just jump in here, Leah, it sounds like, one way to think about this is to think about like, what's our backlog of stuff that, we'd love to be working on, but don't usually have the time for. Is any of that stuff that can be done remotely with a little bit of supervision and oversight? And then also thinking about this moment of doing things remotely as an opportunity to maybe branch out into other kinds of things that you might have liked to do under other circumstances, but this has sort of forced your hand, whether it's kind of upping your social media game or digital projects, things like that. I know in the League's instance, we've been talking about doing kind of videos and other things like that for a long time, and here we are doing them now that we're doing so much over Zoom. So
I should add that even though the internship is a required part of our program, students are often interested in doing more work to get more experience. And I encourage that you don't just have to get credit for an internship. They can sort of be a intern/volunteer, but they wouldn't necessarily be beholden to the same rigor and hours. But if you're willing to take students on a less rigid format in terms of, less than 8 hours a week or something like that, I think there'd be a lot of people who still want something to do and to be involved and to be building their resumes rather than kind of writing this thing out and getting nothing for it. I think a lot of people are interested in being productive during this time. That crowdsourcing stuff like the Library of Congress is doing with the transcriptions of documents and making those digitized so that they can be searchable, those are incredibly popular. And every time they release a collection that's relevant, like women's suffrage or something that has to do with racial injustice, something that's really pertinent, people they'll give a deadline, they'll give like a challenge, like, I bet you can't, guys, are you good? Can you transcribe 7,000 pages in 3 weeks? And it's done in a week. I don't know who's on that, but do things like that. There's as the fall comes, we're all putting together projects for our classes also. So feel free to reach out to CCSU in general, because if we don't have interns, we also have students and coursework, and then we like to get our students to do real life work instead of just assignments. So often their assignments are projects for other institutions. So if you want a crowdsource eyes on your digital exhibit, you want sort of an input about how the public might be consuming something, feel free to reach out. We can always make students look at it as a requirement and write up some comments.
2 questions. Andy at the Stanley Whitman House asked if CCSU is still organizing history harvests.
Yeah, so we tried to, we've had 2. This year there was supposed to be another one. I was on sabbatical, but our new faculty member, Juan Coronado, who our new Latino historian, was taking it over because it is a Latino history harvest. We were really excited about that. He took over the local history class, and then of course COVID. And so we weren't able to do a harvest this year, but we're trying to now figure out how to navigate the COVID collecting and merging it somehow with the Latino harvest, and we're in the middle of discussions on getting those formats down so that people can start contributing online, and we don't have to have a public event every time just to collect items in that way. That's where sort of this pick story stuff comes out. We're in discussions about how to do all that. We're in partnership with CHS. So we're looking to sort of combine all this in a certain, at a certain time. And that we're using this time to kind of collate all those projects. So that's a long answer, Andy, to the idea that yes, we are still very much committed to maintaining the history harvest. It's just a matter of figuring out best how to continue collecting and make it accessible to as many people as possible. For those of you who don't know, it was an effort to collect digitized objects from the Latino community, the local Latino community, in order to start documenting that community, which isn't well documented in Connecticut.
And Beth Rose just would like you to reiterate that you are still looking for internship positions for the summer for your students, or is it mostly for next year's academic year?
I'd say mainly the academic year. There's a couple students who are still interested in doing things for the summer. That can sometimes change at any time, because then, you know, I'll say, oh, I have something for you. And they're like, oh, I found that, you know, I'm doing this now. But we have a handful of, you know, we have a couple students who are still looking for the summer. I've sent them a few things. And then there's others, again, who are just kind of waiting out to see how many classes they're going to do in the fall, and how that's all going to fall out, whether they'd rather just take classes and wait on the internships so that they can do something in person or not. I think it will all depend, you know, on what they're doing. Like if the project interests them, then they're going to be more willing to do a digital version or a remote version.
So we are close to time, but we do have one last question. If a museum wants to offer a stipend for interns, what is the recommended amount for a semester for an undergraduate and then for a graduate student?
Yeah, it's really hard to do that because everybody has different needs and you know, and resources. But again, like anything you can afford, a couple $100, $500. I know, I think CHS for the summer is like $1,000. You know, it's great if it can match some kind of a salary, but that's often not the case. But I think for students, anything between $500 and $1,000 is a lot to them. But I think they appreciate anything. So I don't want to say a number and have you been like, there's no way we can afford that in our budget, because anything means something. You know, maybe at least a couple $100, but it's again something we're encouraging because at least it shows value in their work, and it provides you know, them a sense that they're getting compensated, or just, you know, when it was a case of paying for their gas money or whatever, you know, their internet connection, especially now as they're struggling.
Yes. And as Christina followed up with, food sometimes helps.
Yeah, yes. And that's why I'm saying anything, like even access to software and those kinds of things, you know, that they would need to spend money on, but that you could provide them for free is a way of kind of creatively compensating as well. Christina agrees that software is huge.
Great. Well, we're getting close to time. I want to thank you all for participating. I'm hopeful that Leah may be able to stick around for a few minutes after we stop recording to answer a few additional questions, if there's anyone who wants to stick around and chat a little bit more about what they're doing at their own institution. I want to thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you at a future CLHO colleague circle. Thanks.
Thanks, Amrit.
Great.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Amrit. Have a good summer.
Yeah.
Well,
Andy,
see you again.
keep in mind.
Thanks, Sandy. Nice to see you.
Leah, we're not going to have an intern this summer just because things go up and down. But we are looking for a part-time temporary person as a museum associate, because we have someone who's taking a leave. So I'll send you a job posting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Send us a job posting too, Andy.
Oh yes, yeah. You know, I have to tell you, Amrit, this everything that's going on with CLHO, and you know, it's been great. I talked to our board and just shared with them how much a great resource this has been. So,
well, that's very gratifying to hear, Andy. Thanks.
Absolutely. Have a good day, guys. See you.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Hi, all. I just wanted to hang out for a sec because Tev's not ready to eat lunch yet, and that's how we live now.
Nice.
But I just wanted to reach out, Amherst, and I noticed Beth just left, but concerning some of the things that are currently going on,
Yeah.
I really think that it's a great opportunity for CLHO to kind of lead the way. Working with the Connecticut Freedom Trail and taking over their social media on a volunteer basis. I'm, noticing that there is a need, and we are at a crossroads of opportunity where if we remain passive, I am nervous that the change won't stick. So, the reading resources are great, but there needs to be a definitive statement, at least, and the statement isn't everything, but we don't have enough Black Americans or people of, color in our field. And the best way to do that is to ensure that it's a safe space for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way to do that is through visibility and understanding. So, I'm just seeing some of my colleagues of color, or any kind, even purple hair, there's things that need to happen to just ensure that we're not doing the same thing we've always done, because it keeps us stagnant and it doesn't result in any change because we just continue to operate within the same paradigm because we're comfortable with it. And, I just wanted to mention that since we're having this moment,
Sure.
because I believe in CLHO, and you know that, and I believe that there's so much good that can be done. And I don't think it has to be so contentious. And if it's an issue of being contentious, we're all so smart. Let's find a way to say it the right way, I guess. I don't know. But, if it means just posting those resources, that would make me very happy. And not just me, I can do the ripples out of Southington and on the Freedom Trail and sow small seeds. But, if I don't say something, I feel like I'm being passive as well. So I just wanted to mention that. And obviously I came to see Dr. Glaser. I could see your house. I love this.
So my inspiration, what I keep mentioning now, there's a group in New Haven forming about trying to redo the curriculum and connect to local history, which is part of the frameworks. I think Chris Regan was on this call. He's gone now, but the teaching with historic places. I know Brian Greenfield reached out to me too. There's a lot of these places, and I should have said this during the call, but a lot of these places are already on the National Register, and there's that teaching historic places format that can match easily, is a shell to put the curriculum to the place, because all these schools are looking for ways to talk about this stuff, and all the, and then the institutions are looking for ways, and CSU and CLHO can kind of help bring them maybe together. Either have, if we don't have all the students to help develop that curriculum, though I think we could. I think there could be enough people to start to make those, even if they're not officially be able to be processed through the National Park Service. You use that shell. It's just a fast track curriculum program.
Love it.
For certain, not every site can do it, but certainly the Freedom Trail sites. Yeah.
We're trying. We get new nominations, but that was another Zoom call with Todd and everyone, last week, where we were discussing, should we do a statement? Should we not do a statement? In my opinion, I don't feel like that's really a question for the Freedom Trail.
Yeah.
And then it's like, so where do we go from here? Say hi, Tev. Tev's here. So, it's like, where do we go from here? And it's like, we continue to document these sites, but also we need to try to diversify the board, and we need to, it's just too long that we say we want to, and not long enough where our white allies are like, let's absolutely do it, definitively. And so we're at that point right now. And as heritage people, we freaking know that, if we don't choose a side right now, this is that time. We're being called. And in a metaphorical sense, but so yeah, other than that, and also I'm festering in this household, man, child, cat, get me out of here. I need to do things. I got to channel this energy.
I'm impressed that you have energy being here with a 15-month-old.
Yeah.
If I can do the books once a month, I feel like I've accomplished something.
That's awesome. I know. 50, like Anna being 9 is easier because now she's a teenager. She doesn't want to be around us. It feels like. Technically she's not, but she acts like one.
No.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go.
Thank you for that, Christina.
And have a great day, you all. And Valerie, you look great. Joni, you look great. Kim, I'm sure you're awesome. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Christina.
I gotta-
And I wanted to say, Joni and Valerie, you know, the project that Valerie's going to be working on, I mean, there's a lot of really cool possibilities to connect to relevant themes over that, the whole Bleeding Kansas stuff. So.
Yeah, you say that now, you wait as I lean on you for all of your expertise.
Oh, that's fine. That stuff is easy. As I said, I mean, I did Western history. That stuff is easy. I sent you like 4 things.
Oh yeah, the Kansas history doesn't bother me because I can work on that. You know, the storyboards and the budgets, and you know, I'm looking back on papers and going, oh, you said do this differently, do that differently. So I can just see our email connection being.
But I think something that you can do is, as part of the internship, you're laying the groundwork maybe for a more complete project that, depending on how this goes, you could actually then turn into a capstone project. But you have to, lay that groundwork
Right.
first.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You want this to be really successful and good.
I do. I'm very excited about it. It's a marvelous project. So.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. It's nice to meet you, Valerie.
Nice to meet you too, Joni. We've been talking via phone, but no.
Yeah,
Not
nice to see what everybody, I know.
So it's going to be wonderful. All right. Well, I'm going to get off and let the 3 of you continue and enjoy and have a great day. And gee, I hope a number of other students enroll. This is ridiculous. You know, you can't live your life frightened
I know,
about
we even have students who are supposed to be starting and they still haven't enrolled in the classes, so we just don't know. I have 3 classes and I only have maybe 20 students over 3 classes.
Wow.
One of them might not even run the 510 because I'm not going to run it with 3 students in it. I'm just going to wait till they have a cohort. And it's too bad because the program's supposed to begin with an introduction to public history. But it's not fair to them. You know, it's not really doing what it's supposed to do if there's only 3 of them.
Yeah. 510 is important, right?
Yeah.
So, all right. So you will be running the what are we doing? Preservation? That looks okay.
Yeah, that's running. That looks okay. I don't know what they're going to decide and if they're going to make me go on campus, but I have every intent to not go on campus because I don't think it's worth it.
All right.
My physical presence with a mask on behind plexiglass is not better than this. I just don't think that's the case.
Right.
I'm going to try to send people out on like their own field trips, you know, so maybe not just the whole class won't just be Zooming, but.
Okay. All right. You know, we're getting so comfortable with this since you know, March, and you know, I have been doing things as part of my daughter's little job that, you know, via Zoom well before this. So we've been teaching classes and having meetings and, you know, a lot of that because the people we've been talking to have been outside of our community.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty comfortable with Zoom, but, you know, and all the business meetings that I attend are all Zoom. So, you know, oh, Amherst is waving.
I have to go. I can leave you guys here. I just need to make somebody the new host. So I'll make Leah the new host, and we're going to leave.
Yeah.